Hi, this is Kelly Hawkins, and I am reading Great Grandfather by Martha Figley, Chapter 1. It starts with her address, Martha Figley, 4018 South Clinton Street in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Great Grandfather by Martha E. Figley. Born on August the 8th in the year 1808 in Paris, France, he was to be an emperor, or most certainly a king. His father and mother were separated at the time, and had been more or less for several years. And the year before they had experienced great sorrow in the death of their eldest son, who was just 5 years of age. The parents could not be reconciled, and so they separated again, with the father returning to his far-off homeland, and the mother remaining with her new baby, and the boy who would now be eldest. His name was Frederick Charles, and he was just 4 years of age. Oh, I need to say Frederick Charles was not his name at the time. He changed his name to Frederick. Okay. This new male child was born prematurely, and it was doubtful that he would live. He was so tiny and frail, and so ghastly white, that many extra servants were hired, and the finest of medical care summoned. It was 2 weeks before the birth announcement was made by the father, and he had a cannonade set off all along the border of France and Spain, announcing the arrival of the child. This delayed action of the father caused much comment throughout the world, and brought about much speculation as to the parentage of this male child. Though we must consider the time it took for the news to reach Holland from France, nevertheless the newspapers made much of the story, and gossip ran that the king was not the father of this child. Great-grandfather, page number 2. A great-uncle, who was a cardinal in Rome, learned of the gossip and publicity, and he immediately contacted King Louis, the father. Then he came back with the announcement that if King Louis said he was the father, then that should be sufficient for all time. The rumors soon quieted down, and the mother and father made another attempt to live together when joined in Paris. The mother, however, refused to join the king in that faraway country where her eldest son had died, and due to the climate of that country, she was much afraid that her baby son would never survive, and he would also die there. So she remained in Paris. She very often joined her mother Josephine in one of her homes, or in the country where they had long visits together. In the year of 1810, Louis the father again journeyed to Paris, and with his marriage a failure, he tried to divorce Hortense. This was denied him, and the mother was given custody of the children. She made arrangements to have her baby baptized at Fontainebleau on November 4th, in the year of 1810, and named him Jean-Joseph, though throughout the world he was known as Louis Napoleon. Tiny and frail, he seemed well enough, though his white complexion remained always. Oh, where it says Fontainebleau, I think she means Fontainebleau. I'm sure of it, actually. Okay. Heartsick, weary and lonesome, King Louis, or Louisiac, returned to his country alone, and finding himself disinterested in all matters concerning his people, he finally abdicated in the year 1810, and immediately left the country, leaving behind all possessions, and taking only what he could carry. He gave up home, family, and country, and ruined all chances for his sons ever to become rulers there. Great-grandfather, page number 3. About the earliest memory that John Jacob had of his childhood was the many visits that he and his brother enjoyed on their grandmother's farm, her castle and gardens. Their childhood was far different than that of other children, for they were born in the times of Napoleon, and due to battle and unrest, they were often hidden, sometimes with very strange people. Often they would travel for days, with only the servants to care for them, and when they went to their mother, they often slept in her carriage, content with their heads resting in her lap. They worshipped their beautiful mother. She was a very busy and cheerful woman, very much talented. She would often sing and play for them. She also drew very beautiful pictures. Then came a year that she cried all the time. Later she told them it was the year 1815. Her mother Josephine had died the year before. They were all sad. It was the year both boys left their childhood behind them and really grew up fast. This was also the year they seemed to travel or hide somewhere always. Their mother was afraid of something, and so were they. In the middle of the night they were awakened and had to go with servants to strangers. Often they had to stay in one room and did not dare go near a window. Then how happy they would be when mother came for them, and she would take them away with her again. Sometimes they would not leave the carriage for days, and had only roadside rests, or stopped long enough for horses to be changed. This seemed to go on forever, and mother told them later that she had traveled and hidden for 9 months. It was all during the year 1815. Just about everything had happened to them that year. Their father again journeyed to Paris, and asked for the custody of son Frederick. He went to court and sued for the boy's possession. Mother did not appear publicly, but sent her best friends Charles Flauhat and Charles Bidouer to represent her, but she lost the case. Great-grandfather, page number 4. And Frederick would have to go with his father by the end of November 1815. No wonder that mother had cried all the time. She and John Jacob would be alone, and not only that, mother told them later on that they had lost 3 cousins in death, 2 uncles were badly hurt in battle, step-grandfather was arrested and imprisoned, another uncle was executed, and mother's dearest friend, Charles Boyer, was seen on a Paris street by a former valet who reported him to the gendarmes. They told on him, and Charles Boyer was shot dead by the royalists. When they knew for sure of the time Frederick was to go with his father, it was just too much for mother, and she returned to her home in Paris, which was under Bourbon rule, and she ruined all chances for the boys to become kings of that country. Yeah, that's a mistype. Like I said, and this is not a corrected version. This is exactly how it was. I was able to read it from the mimeograph. It was a bad copy though, so some things aren't certain on some pages. But let me continue. By the end of the year, father came to get Frederick. They all cried and cried. Frederick was only 11 years at the time, but had to go with his father. John Jacob missed brother so very much that he soon became very ill and could not eat at all. Mother had always taught them never to touch food except that which had been supervised or prepared by mother. And now she herself cooked what little John Jacob would eat, and she spent all the time with John Jacob that she could. She talked to him always, even though he was only 11 years of age. He would have to get well and learn to read and write. Though he could speak French and German very well, he needed to learn much more, and mother promised to find him a tutor, but this proved a difficult task, because he would travel with them wherever they went, because they were without home and country. Great-grandfather, page number 5. Mother finally found an old Jewish rabbi who needed a home. He sadly lacked many qualifications, but he could learn the boy to read and write, and he would live and travel right along with them. Mother was very tired of traveling, and was forced to live wherever she could. Paris would always be her home, but Paris was firm in denying all Bonaparte's residence in France, so they traveled again. Mother loved the big cities, but also loved roaming in the woods and mountains. In the year of 1817, she found a Swiss chateau by a lake. Here she thought she might find contentment, though the chateau was very old and sat above Lake Constance on the Swiss border, not too far from her France and Germany. At the chateau she hoped to find peace and raise her one remaining son, but she soon learned that she would not be allowed to live there. So tired to death and terrified, She wrote to her brother Eugene in Germany, and he, by return post, sent her an invitation to come and visit him in Germany. This interested John Jacob very much, for he would have cousins to visit, and other children would be there, so they looked forward to their visit with pleasure. But the old tutor would not go into Germany with them. They had a wonderful visit there, but all good things must come to an end, and the boy's father was one who ended their pleasure when he heard that John Jacob had only about 2 years of schooling. He was beside himself, and insisted that something be done immediately for the boy's education. Father had seen to it that Frederick attended a military school early, and John Jacob would never be a nobleman without an excellent education. Father and Eugene talked it over, and decided that Germany was the safest and best place, and since there was a military academy at Augsburg that took very young boys, John Jacob was to attend there, and Mother would find an apartment close by to live. Great-grandfather, page 6. Father Louis now made his home in Italy. He had a little villa at Florence. Most of the Bonaparte family now made their homes in Rome or close by, with the exception of brother Joseph, who made his home in America. And Gerald had married a German princess and lived in Germany. Father's family wanted nothing of Hortense, nor her 2 boys. The whole family avoided them, and Hortense was glad, for she did not love any of them either. 3 years later, in the year of 1820, Hortense learned that she could now live in her chateau in the German mountains. This was wonderful news to her and John Jacob, a home to call their own, and one from which nobody could dislodge them. They looked forward to some peace and contentment, and it was an end to this ever moving around from one place to another. Mother and son made plans so fast and left Germany so quick, they had forgotten all about the boy's education, but were sure that something could be arranged. The French and German language the boy had known since his birth, but Mother wanted him to learn a bit of Greek and Latin also, and maybe some English also, so another tutor would have to be hired. This time it was not so hard to find one. A maid at the chateau knew of a good teacher, and he was immediately engaged. He set up a very rigid schedule for the boy that took up all his time, 10 hours of study and 2 one-hour nature walks, besides classes in art and fencing. The art class he did not like and never made use of it, but the fencing lessons left him with a bad scar under his left eye that remained for life. Great-grandfather, page 7. Father and Frederick come to Switzerland to visit them, and mother and son also went to Italy to visit brother. Outside of that bit of travel, mother and son were content to remain in their Swiss chateau. 7 long years the boy worked and studied. He joined some military installations and was made an honorary Swiss citizen. Also wrote several pamphlets and books. The time passed quickly, and they soon received word that Frederick Charles was to be married. Uncle Joseph had 2 daughters, and he wanted them to marry back into the family. So Frederick was to marry Charlotte, the oldest, and mother and son were invited to the wedding. When it was time for them to return home, Father Louis was lonely and wanted John Jacob to remain for a longer visit. Hortense Eugenie agreed to the plan and returned to her chateau at Arenberg alone. Frederick Charles owned a paper mill in Florence. John Jacob was interested for a while, but preferred to travel, and while visiting Italy, another young man his age, who is called the Comte d'Rs, they struck up a firm friendship, and where John Jacob could not travel, the Comte would go for him, and he would inform John Jacob of all he had accomplished. John Jacob, Frederick Charles, and Rs joined a secret society in Italy. Their families did not approve of it, and all 3 men caused a good bit of unrest in Italy by displaying French colors. They were warned of arrest and were forced to go to Tuscany for a while. Through these years, John Jacob was married secretly, and for various reasons, nothing was ever published about the marriage. Great-grandfather, page 8. When Pope Pius VIII died in the year 1830, there was much confusion in Rome. and other places, and people were battling one another in the streets. And the King of France learned of an uprising being planned for the better part of the year, and he had the boys arrested and sent out of Italy. They soon had their freedom, but were not content, and soon found themselves in another skirmish. This time things did not go so well. John Jacob and Arrest were free, but something terrible had happened to Frederick Charles. He had been hit in the head and left for dead on the roadside close to a German town. John Jacob and Arrest found him alive and rescued him with a German farm wagon. Mother and Uncle Eugene were summoned, also the best of medical and surgical care. Frederick Charles did not die, though all of Europe thought so, and even Father Louis was informed of his death, and prepared an epitaph to be put on the son's burial place. Hortense Eugenie could not tell the truth, or they would have all been killed. So to the world Frederick Charles was dead, and Hortense Eugenie returned home with John Jacob and a wounded soldier friend, who had spots all over him whenever they were stopped. His head was shaved and his clothes were far too big. Colonel Zappy, they called him, and Hortense had a passport for Mrs. Hamilton and her son. They made their way safely back to Chateau Arenberg. John Jacob told the family later why Frederick Charles had so many fainting spells. It was that he had a metal plate in his head. His skull had been laid open and left for dead at the roadside. Miracle surgery was performed upon him. He recovered, but was never well, and it was very hard to live with him. He could not be angered. Great-grandfather, page 9. Mother had both her sons back to live with her at the chateau, but she had to hide Frederick Charles, and then his wife and child wanted to join him at the chateau, and Hortense Eugenie announced it publicly that the widow and her child would make her home with them. The King of Rome died in the year 1832. This left John Jacob third in line for the throne. Father Louis was first, and Uncle Joseph second in line. The last thing in the world that Father Louis wanted was a throne, and Uncle Joseph just returned it to England from America. But he could not enter France, so John Jacob was next in line for emperor or king. All eyes were centered upon the little Swiss chateau in Nuremberg. Serenity was gone, security was everywhere. And Mother Hortense Eugenie learned of a ship sailing to Portugal, and when it left, Frederick Charles was upon it. We could never learn who went with him. We only know that John Jacob was shipped to America. His ship went by way of Portugal, where they picked up someone. Though Frederick Charles himself was in America by the year 1835, we think that the wife of John Jacob was picked up in Portugal. It was all done so secretly. John Jacob had just one goal ahead of him now, and that was emperor or king, and he seriously strove for that honor by much study and planning, and had many meetings with friends. They made many secret plans, and John Jacob was writing a book about strategic warfare that was used for many a battle. He was respected by all, and the thoughts come to him there was only one way to get back into France, and that was to battle his way in, as Napoleon had done before. Great-grandfather, page 10. To re-enter France, it would take many men and ships, and much wealth to buy soldiers and ammunition. He would have to gather up many men and ships to take over towns and ports on the way to Paris, and for this made many preparations, studied maps, and held many discussions, and finally reached a decision to enter Paris by the end of the year of 1836. He planned to go by way of Strasbourg, as they had a military garrison there, and he also had many friends. He gathered some of his father's soldiers, also grandfathers, some of the cousins, and quite a few friends. In the latter part of October in the year of 1836, they made their attack on Strasbourg. Something went wrong. Somebody had betrayed them. They were instantly seized and arrested. Hardly a shot was fired, and in a few minutes all was over with, and the main planners found themselves in jail. This was a disgrace. They were terribly ashamed, but could not say what had gone wrong. The worst part of it comes several days later. When Father Louis and the family heard of it, they were incensed, and completely fed up with John Jacob. They wanted no more of him, and the Bonapartes wanted him shipped to America, so he could never come back and disgrace them again. Several days later, some of the relatives, quite a few of the Bonapartes, got their wish, and by the end of the year, John Jacob was on the way to America. The ship Andromeda had orders to go by way of Portugal to pick up some relatives, and it did not arrive in America until April of 1837. Great-grandfather, page 11. When John Jacob was arrested at Strasbourg, he had plenty of bonds and certificates in his possession. He was to use them to help buy for the skirmish. Many incriminating papers had been taken from him and buried. Only one-third of his wealth was returned to him. He was not too much worried. He was sure the cousins in New York visiting would help him. He should have known they wanted nothing of him, did not even speak to him, and threatened his life unless he disappeared. Not knowing which way to turn, he went to New Jersey, where Uncle Joseph had lived for 13 years, as the Count de Survilleres on Point Breeze. Here John Jacob found the place locked up and for sale. How could his father-in-law do such a thing to him? So he wrote to his Uncle Joseph and asked to buy some of the property there. Joseph never answered his letters. How could he treat his daughter so? But it was no worse than leaving his brother Napoleon on the island of Helena. Both John Jacob and Frederick's wives were with child, and so great was their concern over the safety of the children that they at once planned to head in the wilderness of Indiana, where they knew that land was waiting for them. Carlotte gave birth to a son before they left New York, and great were their fears for him. So Frederick took the women and children into Pennsylvania, where he knew of some immigrants, and John Jacob remained in New York for word and money from Hortense Eugenia, but he was not prepared for the message that he did receive. Hortense Eugenia was very ill, and was to have surgery, but she promised to help him in the person of Arrest, who was on his way to America, to bring money and personal possessions. Great-grandfather, page 12. Arrest soon came to New York, with many securities and papers, also orders from Hortense Eugenia to have both men and families to leave for the wilderness at once, and Arrest must have gone west with them, or perhaps ahead, for the story goes that a very handsome young man came west to oversee the building of a cabin, and make preparations for the family to come, and that he had set all maidens' hearts aflutter. He was a hero to the family. Hortense Eugenia sent her last farewell letter. It was to both her sons. She also sent her blessings to Arrest, and then she died in the year of 1837 in the month of October. Her body was laid to rest at Royal, France, beside her mother Josephine. All history and encyclopedia said John Jacob was at her bedside, but we do not know who was there taking his place. John Jacob's wife gave birth to a daughter in Pennsylvania in the year 1837, and John Jacob was not at her side. He was supposed to be in New York waiting for more money to come to him from mother and grandmother's estate. New York was a small city then, with cobblestones for walks and grass growing beside them. There was no Ellis Island, nor any immigration laws. Nothing was required for travel but a passport. Man could go anywhere he chose. Food and game were aplenty, and money was only needed for ammunition and clothes, a night's lodging or a bath. But money was needed for women and children in Pennsylvania. The financial condition for Frederick was much worse. He had no income from anywhere. His health was bad. He could not work hard because of his head injury. To all, he was a dead man, and it was up to John Jacob to take care of Frederick and his family. Okay, well, that was the first chapter, and I appreciate you watching and listening. Later on in the story, it kind of veers off, and she gives an example of what life was like back in that time. That's really not, it's a different family. I guess she thinks it's a neighbor family of the Benders, or Bonapartes. So I'm not sure if that's the next chapter, if it's coming, or if it's later, but it's coming up. Okay, so thank you for watching.